Elena had lived alone on her family homestead for almost 2 years, and every month felt harder than the one before. The land was wide and beautiful, with open fields, a small barn, and a long dirt road that faded into the distance. But beauty did not make life easier. She woke before sunrise, fed the livestock, collected water, fixed tools, and worked the fields until her arms ached. Some days she went to bed without finishing everything. The truth she refused to say out loud was simple. She could not manage everything alone. After her parents passed away, she tried to stay strong. People in town told her she should sell the land and move somewhere easier, but she couldn't do it. This homestead held every memory she had. She promised herself she would protect it, even if that meant working until she was completely exhausted. But there were nights she felt the weight of loneliness so strongly that she sat near the window, watching the moon and wondering how much longer she could keep going. One stormy evening, after a long day of trying to repair a broken fence, Elena finally admitted something she never thought she would. She needed help, someone she could trust, someone who would not try to take the land from her, someone who would work with her, not against her. People in town were not always kind, especially when they saw a young woman alone. A few had offered help, but their offers came with expectations she didn't want. It was her neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Hall, who quietly suggested the idea of a mail-order husband. At first, Elena laughed and shook her head, but after days of thinking, rethinking, and imagining all her options, she decided to try. She wrote a letter explaining who she was, what she needed, and what kind of man she hoped for. Someone kind, hardworking, gentle, and honest. She mailed it, and the agency replied that they would try to find a match. Weeks passed, and Elena almost forgot about it. The farm work kept her busy, and she told herself not to hope too much. But one morning, as the sun began to rise, she heard the distant sound of wagon wheels. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. A small hired wagon was approaching slowly, carrying only one passenger. The man sitting in the back looked down at his boots as the wagon came to a stop. He had a bag beside him and a nervous posture, like someone scared of doing something wrong. The driver helped him down, nodded to Elena, and then rode off, leaving the two strangers facing each other in quiet morning light. Elena took a small breath. "Are you Jonas?" she asked softly. The man lifted his head slowly. He had gentle eyes, brown, soft, and full of something she could not name. He nodded once. "I'm Elena," she said, trying to smile. Jonas opened his mouth as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. He swallowed and looked down again. Elena felt a mix of worry and curiosity. She had expected him to be shy, but she hadn't imagined silence this deep. "It's all right," she said, trying to ease his discomfort. "You must be tired." He nodded again and followed her quietly toward the house. His steps were careful, almost hesitant, like he was trying not to disturb anything. When he entered the small kitchen, he looked around as if the simple wooden table and clay cups were things he needed permission to touch with his eyes. Elena poured him water and set bread on the table. Jonas thanked her, but his voice was so soft she barely heard it. He ate slowly, almost politely, as if he didn't want to take too much. Elena tried asking where he had traveled from, but he gave short answers, sometimes only a few words. Every time he tried to say more, he stopped himself, as if afraid he might say something wrong. When breakfast ended, Jonas stood and tried to help clean the table without being asked. Elena noticed he moved carefully, not clumsy, just cautious. It reminded her of someone who had spent a long time being careful about every action. "Let me show you around," Elena said gently. She guided him to the barn, the fields, and the tool shed. Jonas listened quietly. He nodded at everything, and when she explained what needed repairing, he looked at the equipment with focused eyes. She didn't need to explain twice. He understood quickly. After the tour, he set down his bag in the small guest room. Elena went outside to feed the animals, thinking he might rest. But when she came back, she saw him already carrying a hammer and nails toward the broken fence. He worked silently but skillfully. His movements were steady, controlled, and full of determination. Elena watched from the porch. She realized he wasn't trying to impress her. He simply needed to work. It was as if silence felt less heavy when his hands were busy. For the rest of the day, Jonas worked on small tasks. He fixed a broken gate, repaired the handle of a water bucket, and even stacked firewood neatly near the back door. Every time Elena tried to thank him, he only smiled a little or nodded. His eyes always held something deep, gratitude maybe or sadness, but he never put it into words. As evening came, Elena set dinner on the table. Jonas waited at the doorway, unsure if he should join her until she waved him in. He sat opposite her, eating slowly, shoulders slightly tense. She tried asking more about him, his family, his travels, but he looked down, searching for words, and finally shook his head gently, signaling he couldn't answer yet. "It's okay," Elena said. "You don't have to say anything until you want to." Jonas looked up at her then. His eyes softened. It was the first time he held her gaze for more than a second. In that moment, Elena understood something surprising. He wasn't silent because he didn't care. He was silent because something inside him was locked away, something he didn't know how to open yet. After dinner, Jonas stepped outside. Elena followed a few minutes later to bring in the lantern. She found him standing near the fence, looking at the sky. The stars shone brightly, and the night air was cool. Jonas didn't notice her at first. He stared upward with wet eyes, not crying openly, but holding a pain that seemed too heavy for words. Elena stopped a few steps behind him, not wanting to disturb him. She watched as he closed his eyes, as if trying to swallow emotions he didn't know how to express. There was something heartbreaking in the way he stood, strong enough to work all day, yet carrying a sadness that made him look fragile. She wondered what story was hidden behind those silent eyes. Had he lost someone? Had someone hurt him? Why did he seem so afraid of speaking? She wanted to comfort him, but she knew she had to move slowly. Trust from a silent man was not something she could rush, so she simply whispered, "Good night, Jonas," and walked back to the house. Jonas turned. For a moment, the lantern light reached his face, and she saw something new, a small, grateful expression, like her simple words had touched the locked part of him. He nodded gently, then looked back at the sky, as if the stars were the only place he could speak freely. Inside the house, Elena sat near the window and watched him for a few moments. She didn't feel afraid or doubtful. Instead, she felt something unexpected: hope. Jonas might be quiet, but he wasn't cold. His silence wasn't empty. It was full of stories he hadn't told yet, and she found herself wanting to understand every one of them. The first day had ended, but Elena already knew this much. Her mail-order husband might not speak much, but his eyes were already telling her more secrets than words ever could. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of someone moving quietly outside. It was still early, the sky just beginning to turn pale with dawn. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and went to the window. There she saw Jonas already working near the barn, lifting a wooden beam with careful strength. He moved slowly, as if afraid to drop anything or make noise that might disturb someone. Elena stepped outside. The air was cool and dew sparkled on the grass. Jonas didn't notice her at first. He was focused on repairing a cracked post, his brow furrowed in concentration. When she approached, he froze for a moment, then stood straight, unsure if he had done something wrong. "You're up early," she said softly. Jonas nodded. He wiped his hands on his trousers, but still didn't speak. Elena realized something. He wasn't just shy. He seemed to constantly expect correction, as if he was used to someone telling him what not to do. She decided to make things lighter for him. "You don't have to start work before sunrise," she said with a gentle smile. "But I appreciate it." A small, almost shy smile appeared on Jonas's face. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to warm the morning. They walked toward the house for breakfast. Elena cooked eggs and warmed leftover bread. Jonas ate quietly, his shoulders still slightly tense. Whenever she looked at him directly, he lowered his gaze. But she noticed something else. He always paid attention. If she reached for something, he moved his hand to help. If she looked tired, his expression softened with concern. After breakfast, Elena gave him a task she hoped they could do together: repairing the roof of the chicken coop. She wanted to see if working side by side might help him feel comfortable enough to relax. They spent the day lifting wooden planks, hammering nails, and checking for weak spots. The sun was warm and birds chirped nearby. Elena tried to start small conversations. "Did you work with tools before?" Jonas nodded. "Farm work?" Another nod. "Do you like living in quiet places?" He paused, then nodded once more, slowly. Elena smiled, not because his answers were short, but because she could see him trying. His face changed with every question, sometimes unsure, sometimes thoughtful, and sometimes touched that someone cared enough to ask. She realized something important. Jonas wanted to express himself, but words felt heavy for him, like each one had to pass through a wall. Later that afternoon, as they carried old wood to the side field, a sound echoed from the road. Hooves. Someone was riding toward the homestead. Jonas stiffened. His shoulders tightened, his breath stopped, and for a moment fear flashed across his face. Elena saw it clearly. He wasn't scared of work or silence. He was scared of people. "It's just the post rider," Elena said in a calm voice. "He comes once a week." Jonas relaxed slightly, but not fully. He stood behind Elena as the rider approached, as if unsure whether the stranger was safe. After the rider left, Jonas didn't return to work right away. He lingered near the fence, looking at the road with troubled eyes. Elena walked to him. "You're safe here," she said quietly. "No one will trouble you." Jonas gave her a look that was full of meaning, thankfulness mixed with disbelief. It was as if he didn't know how to accept comfort. The rest of the day went smoothly, and by evening, the chicken coop roof was finished. Elena felt proud of their progress, not just on the farm, but in their small steps toward understanding each other. When they sat for dinner, Jonas placed a cup of warm water in front of her before sitting down himself. It surprised her. He had watched her drink warm water every evening and now prepared it for her without being asked. It was a small gesture, but it said more than a long speech. After dinner, Elena noticed Jonas wiping tools and placing them back exactly where they belonged. Everything was arranged neatly, more neatly than she had ever managed. He worked silently, but with a care that revealed how much he valued order and usefulness. While he worked, his bag sat on a nearby chair. A folded paper slipped out slightly. Elena didn't touch it, but she recognized it as a letter, the same one she had seen the day he arrived. Jonas noticed her gaze, and a look of pain crossed his face. He grabbed the letter gently, almost protectively, and tucked it back into the bag. "I'm sorry," Elena said quickly. "I didn't mean to look." Jonas shook his head as if telling her she had done nothing wrong, but his hands trembled slightly. He wanted to say something. She could see it, but no sound came. Instead, he stepped out of the house for air. Elena watched him from the window. He stood near the barn, breathing slowly, as if calming himself. She didn't follow. She wanted him to know she trusted him enough to give him space. The next morning, Jonas tried to do even more work than usual. Elena realized he was using work to bury his emotions. She didn't mind. Many people healed that way. But she wanted him to know he wasn't alone. So she joined him. They planted vegetables, cleaned the barn, and mended an old wagon wheel. Jonas didn't talk, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a peaceful quiet, the kind that grows when two people slowly learn each other's rhythm. Around midday, as they walked to the watering trough, Jonas suddenly stepped in front of Elena. She hadn't seen why until she heard a low growl. A wild animal, a thin, hungry-looking coyote, was near the fence, watching them. Jonas stood firm between her and the animal. No words, no hesitation. His posture was protective, steady, and brave. He picked up a long stick and waved it, making himself appear bigger. The animal backed away and eventually ran off. When it was safe, Jonas lowered the stick. Elena looked at him with new eyes. He hadn't spoken, but he had said everything she needed to know. "Thank you," she whispered. Jonas nodded, but his breath was unsteady. He wasn't just protecting her. He was fighting his own fear at the same time. Elena saw it, the small tremor in his hands, the tightness in his jaw. He was brave, but bravery didn't erase fear. It only showed how deeply he cared. The rest of the day seemed different between them. Jonas walked a little closer to her, and Elena found herself watching him with growing respect. She understood now that silence didn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence belonged to the strongest hearts. That evening, Jonas did something unexpected. When Elena stepped outside to bring in laundry, she found the yard swept clean. The tools were arranged in perfect order. Fresh firewood sat neatly piled by the door. Jonas had done all of it while she was cooking. When she thanked him, he didn't look down this time. He looked directly at her. His eyes were gentle but full of emotion he couldn't put into words. Elena felt a small warmth inside her chest, a quiet comfort she didn't expect to feel toward a man she had known only a short while. Later, as darkness settled, she found Jonas sitting quietly near the edge of the field. She walked over, not too close, and sat a short distance away. They watched the sunset together without speaking. It wasn't awkward. It felt peaceful, natural, and strangely meaningful. Jonas glanced at her once, then back at the sky. Elena didn't miss the soft expression in his eyes. It was the same look he had given her the first night. Gentle sadness, mixed with something hopeful. Something that seemed to say, "I want to speak, but I don't know how yet." Elena didn't pressure him. She knew trust took time. Instead, she smiled softly and said, "Good night, Jonas." He looked at her again, and this time, he whispered a quiet word. "Night." It was small, fragile, and barely audible, but it was a start. Elena went to sleep that night knowing something important. Jonas might not talk much, but he was slowly, carefully, opening the door to his hidden world. And she felt ready to listen when he was ready to let her in. Days passed quietly on the homestead, and each day brought Elena and Jonas a little closer, even without many words. They were becoming used to each other's presence. Sometimes they shared small smiles, sometimes silence, sometimes moments when their hands almost touched while passing tools. Jonas still spoke very little, but Elena had learned to read his expressions well enough to understand what he felt. The weather began to change. Clouds gathered more often, the wind grew colder, and the fields rustled with hints of a coming storm. Elena tried to prepare everything before the heavy rains arrived. Jonas, as always, worked beside her, repairing anything that might be damaged: loose boards, weak fences, shaky doors. He worked with steady hands and focused eyes, but Elena could sense something else in him too, a quiet tension, like he was waiting for something he feared. One afternoon, the sky darkened fast. Thick clouds rolled in from the west, and the wind grew sharp. Elena felt a knot in her stomach. Storms were always dangerous on the open land. "Jonas," she called gently, "we should bring the animals inside." He nodded quickly and followed her to the field. Together they moved the animals into the barn, guiding them through strong gusts of wind. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Jonas kept glancing at the sky, his face tight with worry, but he stayed beside Elena, never leaving her alone, even for a moment. By the time they closed the barn doors, rain had begun to fall, heavy drops that struck the earth hard. Elena pointed toward the house, and they rushed back. The storm hit with full force just as they reached the porch. Inside, the windows rattled. Wind scraped against the wooden walls. Elena lit the lantern, and warm light filled the room. Jonas stood near the door, drops of rain clinging to his hair, breathing hard from running. "Are you all right?" Elena asked. Jonas nodded, though he still looked shaken. Storms didn't frighten Elena much. She had lived through many, but she could see they affected him deeply. As the storm grew louder, Jonas started to pace, unable to stay still. He looked at the windows, the roof, the walls, as if expecting something terrible to happen. Elena approached him slowly. "It's just a storm," she said softly. Jonas tried to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. He shook his head, looking frustrated with himself, then turned away, rubbing his hands together as if trying to calm down. Elena waited for a moment, then touched his arm lightly. He froze, surprised. "You're safe here," she said. "Nothing will hurt you." Jonas looked at her, his eyes full of fear he couldn't hide. He wanted to believe her. She could see it. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. But the storm only grew stronger. That night, both of them had to work non-stop to keep the homestead safe. Water leaked from the roof in 2 places. Jonas climbed onto the small indoor ladder to press patches over the drips. The wind pushed against the shutters so hard they almost broke loose. Elena held the window frame while Jonas hammered the latch back in place. The storm lasted for hours. They barely had time to rest between tasks. Jonas's face was pale, but he never stepped back. Every time Elena struggled, he rushed to help her. Every time something shook or broke, he was the first to reach for tools. Near midnight, after fixing another leak, Jonas climbed down from the ladder and suddenly swayed. Elena caught his arm just before he fell. His face was drained of color. "Jonas, sit down," she said quickly. He tried to shake his head, but his legs gave in. Elena helped him sit on the bench near the wall. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes were tired, not from fear now, but from exhaustion. He whispered something too quietly for her to hear. "What is it?" she asked gently. He tried again, voice trembling. "I'm sorry." Elena frowned softly. "Sorry? Why?" Jonas pressed his hands together tightly. He lowered his head. "For everything." The words were halting, broken, as if each one was a struggle. "For being like this." Elena knelt in front of him. "You don't have to apologize. Not to me." But Jonas shook his head again. His chest rose and fell unevenly. His eyes shimmered, not with tears exactly, but with a heavy sadness he had been carrying for a long time. Elena placed her hand gently over his. "Jonas, talk to me when you can. I'll listen." Silence filled the room except for the storm outside. Jonas swallowed, then finally spoke again, slow, painful words that seemed to come from a place he rarely touched. "When I was young, speaking was not allowed," he whispered. "If I talked, I made mistakes, and mistakes meant trouble, so I learned to be quiet." He looked away, ashamed, as if expecting judgment. Elena felt a wave of compassion for him. She kept her voice soft. "Someone taught you that speaking was wrong?" Jonas nodded slowly. "Later. I worked for people who didn't care if I was tired, didn't care if I was hurt. I was only useful when I was silent, so I stayed that way." He closed his eyes tightly, as if reliving memories he wished he could erase. "I tried to leave," he said. "Many times, but it was hard. I had nothing. No one." Elena listened without interrupting. She didn't rush him. She let the silence between his sentences stretch softly so he had space to breathe. "One person, one friend, told me I should go far away," Jonas said. "Start new, be safe." His voice cracked. "He gave me a letter, last thing I have from him." Elena understood now. The letter he guarded so carefully wasn't just paper. It was a piece of the only person who had treated him kindly before he arrived here. Jonas kept his eyes down. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I don't know how to be different. I want to speak, but the words, they feel stuck." Elena reached out and touched his hand gently. "Jonas," she said, "you don't have to be different. Not for me. I don't want you to force your voice. I only want you to feel safe. That's enough." Jonas looked up slowly. For the first time since arriving, tears slipped down the side of his face, not loud or dramatic, but quiet tears that carried years of hidden pain. Elena didn't pull away. She stayed there with him, offering her presence, her calm, and her patience. The storm outside began to settle, but the storm inside Jonas was still fading slowly. He lowered his head, letting himself breathe, letting himself feel something he might never have felt before: acceptance. After a long time, Jonas whispered, "Thank you for listening." Elena nodded softly. "Thank you for trusting me." They stayed there until the rain softened and the wind stopped. Jonas didn't speak again that night, but he didn't need to. Something had changed between them. The wall he carried inside had cracked open a little, just enough to let light in. When morning came, the homestead showed signs of the storm's damage: broken branches, scattered tools, fallen roof shingles. But even with the mess, the world felt strangely peaceful. Jonas stepped outside with Elena, the cool air brushing against his face. He still looked tired, but there was a quiet strength in him now. He didn't stand hunched or tense. He stood beside Elena, not behind her. She saw the difference immediately. They began cleaning up together. Jonas worked steadily, not rushing, not pushing himself beyond his strength. Several times he looked at Elena, as if making sure she was still near. She always met his gaze with the same gentle reassurance. Later in the afternoon, as they fixed the barn roof, Elena noticed Jonas humming faintly, a soft, almost hidden sound. She didn't mention it, but it filled her with a warm feeling. It wasn't singing. It wasn't talking. It was simply proof he felt safe enough to let something small and quiet escape from inside. As the sun set, the homestead looked repaired again. Jonas stood beside Elena, watching the sky turn orange. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His presence was calm now, not afraid, not tense. Elena realized something important. Jonas wasn't silent because he didn't want to talk. He was silent because talking had once hurt him. But now, with trust slowly growing between them, he was learning that speaking didn't have to come with fear. And she felt grateful to be the one he was learning this with. Part 3 ended with a gentle truth. Jonas's first real step toward healing had begun, not with loud words, but with the courage to let someone finally see the pain behind his silence. The storm had passed, and the land slowly returned to its calm shape. The sky grew clear again, the air smelled fresh, and sunlight warmed the wet soil. Elena stepped outside early the next morning and found Jonas already awake, sitting on the porch with a thoughtful expression. He wasn't working and he wasn't tense. He was just sitting quietly, letting the new morning settle around him. When he saw her, he stood up quickly, unsure if he should stay or move. Elena smiled softly and told him there was no rush today. They had fixed most of the storm damage. The rest could be finished slowly. Jonas relaxed a little. He followed her to the small kitchen table, and they shared warm bread and tea. He still didn't speak much, but the silence between them felt different now. Softer, warmer, almost like it belonged to them. After breakfast, Elena picked up a broom to sweep the porch, and Jonas gently took it from her hand. She noticed the difference in his eyes. Before, he avoided her gaze. Now he looked at her with a quiet confidence. Not bold, not loud, just steady. They worked around the homestead together. Jonas moved calmly, without rushing to fix every little thing at once. Elena helped him paint the barn door, repair a broken wheel on the wagon, and clean the leftover branches from the storm. There were moments when their hands brushed by accident, and Jonas didn't pull away like before. Instead, he paused, gave a small, shy smile, and continued. At midday, the sun shone brightly, and they decided to take a break under the shade of a tall tree near the field. Elena brought water, and Jonas sat beside her, keeping a comfortable closeness. He glanced at her from time to time, as if wanting to say something but waiting for courage. Elena didn't push him. She knew the right moment would come naturally. The weather was gentle, the farm was quiet, and it felt like the world had given them a moment to breathe. Elena watched Jonas trace shapes in the dirt with a small twig. He wasn't nervous. He just looked deep in thought. She noticed his hands weren't shaking anymore, and his shoulders weren't tight. "Are you feeling better today?" Elena asked. Jonas nodded. He opened his mouth, trying to speak, but instead he looked down again. The words were there. He just needed a little more time. As the day went on, they fixed a few more things around the homestead. Jonas seemed to enjoy working beside her now. The more time they spent together, the more Elena felt that he trusted her, really trusted her, and trust for a man who had lived through silence was a rare treasure. Later in the afternoon, as they returned to the house, Elena saw Jonas pause near the chair where his bag usually sat. He looked at it for a long moment, his face deep with thought. Inside that bag was the letter he carried everywhere. It was his link to the past, a reminder of someone important, a friend who helped him escape his old life. Elena didn't say anything at first. She didn't want to push him. But after a few minutes, Jonas looked at her with a soft seriousness she had never seen before. He lifted the bag gently and held out the folded letter with both hands. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from emotion. "Elena," he whispered. It was the first time he said her name clearly. His voice was soft, but full of meaning. "Please, read." Elena's heart tightened. She nodded gently and took the letter from him. Jonas stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes stayed on her with a mix of trust and nervousness. She unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was simple and slightly shaky, as if written by someone who didn't have much practice. The message was short. "Jonas, you must go. You deserve peace. You deserve a life where no one hurts you. This world is bigger than what you've seen. Don't let your silence be a prison. Go far away. Start new. And if one day someone cares for you, let them in. Let them hear the voice you are afraid to use." At the bottom was the name of Jonas's friend. When Elena finished reading, she looked up. Jonas's eyes glistened with old memories. He stepped closer, waiting for her reaction. She walked to him slowly and put the letter back in his hands. "He wanted you to find a better life," she said softly. "And you're building that here." Jonas lowered his head, overwhelmed. Elena touched his arm gently. "You're not alone anymore." Those words seemed to unlock something inside him. Jonas took a small breath, then whispered, "Thank you." It was the clearest she had ever heard his voice. For the next few days, something changed in Jonas. He didn't suddenly become talkative, but he wasn't afraid of trying. Sometimes he spoke 2 or 3 words. Sometimes he whispered short sentences. Sometimes he only nodded. But his nods were stronger now, more certain. Elena noticed that he started humming lightly when he worked. A simple sound, but full of calm. He began sitting beside her during meals instead of keeping a quiet distance. And in the evenings, he stayed near her on the porch, watching the sky without fear. One evening, as the sun sank behind the fields, coloring the sky with orange and pink, Elena walked out to check the lanterns. Jonas was already outside, waiting near the fence. His expression was soft, not troubled like before. He cleared his throat quietly, and Elena looked at him. His hands were clasped together as if he was gathering strength. "Elena," he said slowly. She stepped closer. Jonas swallowed. "I feel safe here." The words were simple, but they touched her deeply. She nodded, her eyes shining warmly. "I'm glad you do." He looked down again, gathering courage. "I want to stay." Elena smiled gently. "You don't have to ask. This is your home, too." Jonas lifted his head, and the emotion in his eyes was stronger than any long speech. He stood there silently, but the silence wasn't painful now. It was full of warmth, gratitude, and something growing quietly between them. That night they sat together on the porch. The stars appeared slowly, soft and bright. Jonas leaned back in his chair, calmer than she had ever seen him. After a long moment, he turned to her again. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't speak." Elena felt something gentle unfold in her chest. She reached out and rested her hand on his. Jonas didn't pull away. He closed his fingers around hers carefully, like a man holding something precious for the first time. And that simple touch, that simple closeness, said more than any sentence. Days turned into weeks. The homestead became peaceful again, and Jonas grew more comfortable with his voice little by little. He didn't become loud or talkative, but he no longer feared speaking when he needed to. Elena continued to give him patience, kindness, and a place where silence wasn't a punishment. It was just part of who he was. Their bond grew not through dramatic moments, but through small daily things, working together, sharing quiet meals, helping each other without asking, and feeling safe in each other's presence. Jonas still kept the letter from his friend, but now he no longer held it with fear. He kept it as a reminder of how far he had come. The world he lived in now was different, gentle, warm, and filled with a kind of peace he had never imagined. And when he spoke to Elena, even with only a few words, every word carried honesty. The story ended not with grand declarations, but with something deeper. Jonas had finally found a place where he belonged, a life where his silence was understood, and a person who heard every emotion, even when he had no words. And Elena found something too, someone who didn't need loud promises to show his heart. Someone whose quiet loyalty meant more than anything she had ever known.